Hi. And then if you can, move the monitor to where I can see it. I'm Jared, and this is a new segment that I've decided to just pull out of my head. Disco discusses? Disco details? I don't know. If it doesn't work and we never do it again, it won't need a name. So you let me know in the comments what we should call it. I like alliteration, so disco something. I would like to talk about something, explain something, go into detail on something that's a bit misunderstood sometimes. And that's called, let's use black. That's called the build system. And yeah, that's my handwriting. That's my handwriting. So the build system is how we make patches. It's where every patch comes from. And every patch, every build, comes from a place that we call game dev. Now, game dev works on, there's a couple different layers. There's a couple different persistent environments to development. So we're going to draw some lines here. Let's do this, and this, and this, and this. So we're going to call this one game dev. We're going to call this one staging. We're going to call this one release. And we're going to call this one live. Now, these are for persistent environments. These always exist. And 90-some-odd% of all of our developers are usually, their work is usually floating around this area or that. Go ahead and cross. Hi, Tom. So game dev, oh, did I line that go across? Game dev is where everything exists. Game dev is where code and asset come together. It's like the earth beneath your feet. Everything grows from it, and everything goes back to it when it's done. Staging is a place where assets are developed. That's like one layer removed. It's a place where if you're building 3D art for ships, or you're building a set of armor, or you're building an outpost or a space station or whatever, you're probably working in staging. This is because game dev can be quite volatile. Game dev is where everybody's code and everybody's assets are all colliding and being checked in and checked out. So you don't want to work in game dev if you don't absolutely have to. So staging is this kind of level where the artists can kind of do their thing and maintain some stability. Release is where stuff goes. It kind of elevates. It's another gate. If staging is more stable than game dev, then release is one more stable than staging. It's where we start to put things that are getting ready to go out into release. This is a bit simplified. There's also like main, there's some other things. We're not going to go into every single one in case there's a DevOps person watching and they're like, he's murdering this and whatever. I'm simplifying it a little bit. And then live. Live is an environment that's basically like an internal mirror of whatever's on the live servers right now. So we can mess around with something that is just like what you have live, but without actually being in the server that you're in and stuff like that. It's where hotfixes and stuff generally come from. Now, if all the assets, most of the assets in the game are being developed in staging, the question is begged, where's all the code? Where do all the features get developed? So features, this is all going to make sense why I'm doing this at the end, I hope. So features are developed in what are called feature streams. So we're going to do a couple different feature streams here. And they all branch off of game dev at some point. So let's say this one is cargo, C-A-R-G, I missed a letter, salvage, and flight. These are just three that I'm picking up and coming to mind right now. There are dozens and dozens of feature streams. Squadron 42 is essentially just an enormous feature stream. But everything from persistent entity streaming to server meshing, all these things, they're all feature streams. And this is where they work. Now, let's see what color. So I'm going to use green and blue for this. Now what happens through the course of development is that while they're working in these other environments, occasionally they check things in. So cargo will be like, that thing works, we really like that, so we'll check that in up to game dev. Can we zoom in on the other? Can you do the same one? Is that going to work? Okay. So that'll zoom in. And then flight will check something in. And say salvage will check something in. And these things will go to game dev. But they will also pull things down. Like say salvage had something, was working on something, developed something, and in a meeting, the cargo guys heard about it and says, oh, we really want that. So they will pull down as well. And that'll pull down from there, and that'll pull down from there. These are just random. They happen at different times, in different places, based on how we think a thing is working, whether we think it's worth checking in, whether we like it. It all goes back and forth. So they're separate, but still in communication. It's not like a big open floodgate. It's little tiny, yeah, just take this. I want to take this file and not take this file. It's what we call check-ins and stuff. So everybody is sending things back and forth. As you might imagine, if you can extrapolate this down to about 40, 50, 60 different streams, game dev can be pretty crazy. Game dev has got all this stuff checking in. It gets even worse, or better, if you like game development like I do. Staging content is also doing the same thing. Staging content is checking things in periodically and sending things down to game dev. And then occasionally, like if you're building a salvage ship, you're like, well, I want to know how the salvage is going in case I need to like change the art and stuff like this. So they also pull things up. Whoop. I am not an artist. So basically, all these things, remember, extrapolate this down to like 40, 50, 60, whatever. They're all combining into this gigantic gumbo that we call game dev. It's where the worst of the worst bugs, the kinds of things we never show. We did show once, if you remember the Halloween special in 2019, the Easy How Before, the things we've seen. The worst kind of bugs in existence exist here, where everything just collides. It's where most of our QA works, and why QA are heroes, and why I will always tell their story every single time I can, because QA, the real heroes. Now, we work on a quarterly release schedule. So as we approach time to release a patch, we have to do a phase. Let's use red. We have to do a phase on game dev called stabilization. I'll just write stab, because that's what we want to do to ourselves during this. Now, stabilization is basically where we take all of this stuff that's colliding in game dev and try to stabilize it as much as possible. We also do a thing called exclude. That's where some of the things that have been checked in are not anywhere near done. They're not supposed to be in the next patch or even the patch after. That's where staggered development comes from. Like you're working on a thing, you know that thing's not going to be in there for another patch or two, but you still got to do check-ins because everybody else is looking for your stuff and stuff like this. So the exclusion process is how it's like, okay, that stuff's not supposed to be ready till the next quarter, so we start excluding that. Stabilizes the stuff that's supposed to be there, try to make sure that that works. And then, yeah, it's basically this giant, crazy period where when you're wondering when we're going to branch, and you're wondering when we're going to go to Evocati and stuff like that, it's usually because we are in this phase right here. When we get that to a point where it's like, yeah, all right, you know, nothing's perfect. It's not perfect yet, but we feel like we've figured out our exclusions and we got the things in that we expect to be in. We create a branch, and that we're going to do that up there. And I'm going to tell the story of last year here. So we'll do 317x. So we create a branch called 317x, and 317x now becomes this pipe. It's taking the content that's being checked into game dev, it's bringing it back up into staging, because some of this stuff has never been in staging, and you can work on it a bit in staging and make sure it kind of works, it kind of fits, and the most egregious bugs are gone. Then it moves up to release. These are gates, so it's just another place to work on it, so that if somebody makes a check-in that borks everything, you've got layers of defense. You know, that check-in will only mess up game dev, it won't mess up staging. Or if it does get through game dev and goes to staging, it won't mess up release. Or if it does mess up game dev and staging and release, it won't mess up live. They're all gates trying to protect you, trying to protect the developers so that they have a stable or somewhat stable work environment. You with me so far? I can't see chat. Like I said, we didn't put this together, so I hope everybody's with me so far. So from this, we make a patch, 3.17.0. Is that readable? Is that legible on the zoom in? More or less, more or less. Okay, so 3.17.0. And that's eventually what goes to Evocati, to PTU, to then eventually to live. Now, what happens often is you'll have point patches. We did a 3.17.1 and a 3.17.2, and we won't go up any higher than that because I think that's as high as my zoom in goes. Is that as high as my zoom in goes? Yeah, I can't really go any higher than that, can I? All right. That's enough to tell the story anyway. So the common perception is that a point patch is somehow a lesser patch. It won't have as much information, or won't have as much code, or won't have as much content as the primary 0.0 patch. Technically, procedurally, mechanically, there's no reason for that whatsoever. That is a planning and an execution thing. We intend for 4 patches to go out a year when the realities of game dev allow for it, and we have designated that each one of those quarterly patches will be a 0.0. We throw as much stuff into that one as possible. If I remember correctly, last year in 3.17.1, that was right before Fleet Week, I think. So it had the convention halls, and it had the Scorpius and stuff like that. I could be wrong. Gosh, it was a year ago. If I'm wrong, roast me in effigy on the in the comments. Now, what would normally happen at this point is after you've put the patch out, your primary patch out, and you've utilized the point patches to bug fix and add little things here. Eventually, you come back. Now, while this has been going on, remember, each one of these layers is just a layer of safety and security so our developers can work. Because while that's been going on, these guys have still been checking in. These guys have all been checking stuff in. The whole time, because work doesn't stop. That's staggered development. These guys are up here, these guys are still checking in. And they're all adding stuff to game dev while you're up here, while other people are up here working in a relatively safe environment trying to get the patch out. So it means that before we go to the next patch, the next quarterly patch, which would be 3.18x, we're going to need another stab, another stabilization and exclude. Yeah, my handwriting's a polygon. That's not even letters. Can you zoom in on that? Those are not even letters, but pretend that says stab. That's the normal process. That's how that happens every quarter. This is how most of this works. Again, there are a couple weird exceptions here and there. Like I said, there's another line called main that I'm leaving out, stuff like this. But for the most part, this is a fundamental explanation of the build system. Some features are bigger than others. Some features are more complicated than others. And depending on what you're trying to pull in and what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to pull in and what you're trying to pull out, this phase, this stabilization phase, can take longer, can be more involved. You might remember from the letter from the chairman last year in May, we were going to put the biggest feature stream that we've had in a long time. Is that too low? We'll find out. PES. Is that seen? Okay, so yeah, you kind of see PES. Oop, this way. PES down there. So PES was going, and we wanted to get PES into game dev as soon as possible. Because as long as it's down there, nobody else is working on stuff. So it was important last year to get PES into game dev as soon as possible. And eventually they're like, yeah, we're ready. We can put PES in game dev. Now, if all of these other things make for one heck of a gumbo, you've heard us talk about this if you've been watching the programs and hearing us talk, PES really destabilizes the gumbo. So this stabilization period isn't going to be a short one. It's going to be a very, very long and involved one. Now, knowing that, because we've been doing this for a while, last year, what was decided to do is we would take the normal content, instead of not having a patch for months and months and months, that was the idea anyway. This is back in like April, back in April here, at April or May for 3.17.1. Instead of going, waiting until 3.18 to do another quarterly patch, we decided, we exercised another way of developing patches, or another way of putting content in the patches. If this is all the highways, we said we could take the surface streets. It's not a perfect analogy, but basically we went to all of these different feature streams and said, we don't have to go back and we don't have to go through this to do another quarterly patch if we continue to work in the 3.17 branch. So we went through and we took all kinds of stuff. We took derelict reclaimers, derelict outposts, the snake pit, planetary nav mesh, the 8 new rest station spaceships, space stations, the Grimhex Hospital, the new hangars. We took all of this stuff that was supposed to be in the Q2 patch, and we just said instead of taking the highways, we took, I'm sorry, I'm using blue. We said take surface streets and take these individual things and bring them right into 3.17.2, 3.17.2, 3.17.2. We just rerouted the data. We rerouted the content and said we're going to come up through the pathway that we've already made instead of going back through and making the new pathway, because PES was going to make this stabilized thing really difficult. And we were right. It did. If you're not aware, we're still, we've completed that station, that part, but 3.18 is still like, we're hoping for open PTU to all like any day now. And that's not saying it's today. It's like we're hoping for any day. It's like we're waiting for the word to come out. So this has been a heck of a journey, like we knew it would be. We were hoping it would be shorter, but. So to prepare for that, we brought all this stuff up. All of that stuff we talked about, it's the planetary nav mesh, the AI in all the different outposts, the new outposts themselves, the new derelict reclaimers, all those new missions, the hospital, all that stuff. That was a quarterly patch worth of stuff, but it was put into 3.17.2. That was the quarterly patch. So what I'm trying to illustrate here, and what I'm wanting to illustrate here, is that the virtue of a point patch is a technical thing. It is an indication of the path that the information and the data and the code and the assets took to get to where it's going. It is not an automatic determinant of the quality or quantity of work involved. And the reason I bring that up, 2 reasons rather. One, I really respect the quality and quantity of the work that the people that I work with do. And it pains me when I see people treating 3.17.2 like it was a patch that didn't count. That's me personally. I'm speaking only as myself here. Like they did a lot of really good work in that, and I see stuff where it's like it just gets dismissed because it's got a 0.2 patch. That's me personally. But the more effective reason is because if you read the roadmap roundup that came out on Wednesday, written by the wonderful Jake Bradley of the community team, this is what we're doing again this year. Basically, because of PES, we had PES last year, but now we've got another guy down here called server meshing. And it's going to lead to all the same stuff. Plus, in all this time we've been branched in 3.18, this regular gumbo has gotten it's built up. It's built up, and it's going to take us a while to get through it. And instead of trying to do it at one time, we're going to utilize the alternate path, the path we've already built with 3.18, And we're going to continue building into 3.18 while teams tackle this underneath. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to continue to deliver you the quarterly patch that you want and that we want and everything, while other teams work to stabilize this underneath. It's basically, it's working smarter, not harder. And yeah, I saw some of the comments and stuff about dismissing the 3.18.1 or 3.18.2 or whatever it's going to be, stuff like this. And you know, they're putting Laravel, they're putting the new Laravel in there, stuff like that. So, and they're still determining what's going to go in. We have to determine what can go. Now that's the big ticket. Not everything can take this route. Some things require too many other dependencies. Salvage and cargo required PES. So we could not take them and do this route earlier. So some things require the dependencies, and some things will have to wait for that next branch. But there's lots of things that folks are working on that don't have to wait. New mining stuff and stuff like that. So there's lots more stuff that we can put in there. So basically, I just thought, I didn't know if this had ever been explained before. I couldn't remember. I've been here for 8 years. And if we had explained it before, it's probably changed or evolved in the years. So yeah, this is a little bit about the build system, how it works, and why the point patch mentality is an effect but not a cause. It is generally used to mean small content, small code, small deliverables, but it is not exclusively required to be so. It wasn't for 3.17.2, and we don't intend it to be for the next quarterly patch. Now, again, we still got to figure out what can actually do this stuff, and that's what everybody's working tirelessly on. Jake Ross and Guillaume and all those folks, they're working on that stuff now, and you can keep an eye out on the public roadmap and the roadmap roundup. They're going to tell you, what makes that trip and stuff like that. I can't tell you that. This is all about process. So, yeah, so thank you for indulging me in the first and probably the last Disco Discusses about the build system. I hope it was informative. I hope I didn't anger anybody internally. And if all goes well, I'll see you next week. Next week, speaking of server meshing, ISE is dedicated entirely to the server meshing summit that was going on here last month. We've got Benoit and Roger Gottfried and Chris Bolte and stuff. They're going to talk all about the new plans for server meshing that are being developed through the summit that was going on here. And it's going to be a multi-part thing. It's one part. The first part's next week, and then we'll check in throughout the quarter on how the summit went. So yeah. So for Star Citizen Live, I'm Jared Huckabee, and thanks for humoring me. Bye.